Hello.
Hello, hello.
There we go. Just looking for my mute button. Hello, everyone. Let me see. Andrea said he wouldn't be able to attend today, so it should probably just be us. But let me share my screen here. And you all can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
24th. All right, I'll copy this. Actually, I'll just copy all this. And just remove Andrea and add me. All right. So the agendas. Go to GitHub real quick. I'm still waiting for Andrea to look at this. I pinged him, but he still hasn't gotten back to me on it. So I'll have to probably ping him again. So yeah. Okay, let's start at the very top though. So this is the related to the GitHub issue 252, which was merging source and ID together. So the new changes would get rid of this, and then the ID would then just be, or the source would just be a part of the ID now. So it looks like this. That makes sense. And I think the reasoning for that, so if I remember the issue, David, correct me if I'm wrong, is that because source was optional, it made it harder to like do anything, or it required an extra check that seemed better that would it seemed better that it just having it inside of the ID instead. So that way, if it was optional, you're still just checking for the ID. Is that a good understanding, or was there more to it than that?
It's one of the reasons, yes,
Okay.
exposing the ticket.
So what isn't just optional? I thought most everything was just optional.
Oh, so ID is not optional. Like ID is actually required. So if we look at the schemas themselves, there should be. Oh, this is not helpful.
One of the issues is that source was the definition of subject.source is
Hmm.
it's optional, and if it's not set, you should fall back to context sources. But the ID should be unique into the associated source. But also the context ID should be unique in the source. So there is a confusion. And the other issue is that in some places I made the change, you reference an environment or a pipeline run, and in this definition you provide the ID and the optional source.
Yeah,
But in this,
so
so it was hard if the source is defined in one place but not in another to reconcile and to create a good reference between the two not subject.
yeah, I think what Didisi was saying that he what is required. So there are some requirements. So like ID is required at the top level, and
Hmm.
so is content. And then content also has required at different levels as well. So it's specific to the event, but always at the subject top level, content and ID are always required. And source wasn't in there. So like what David was just saying, like reconciling when it was present versus not made it a lot more difficult. And having it separate, in my opinion, didn't really make too much sense. When it's generally just always a part of the ID anyways. Does does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah, it's yeah, so my dev started last week.
Okay.
So I may need to get back to you on this.
Okay. Um, yeah, for me, it's fine. Like we talked about it in depth, but if you can get back to us today, did he see? That would be great. But I'll try to
Yeah, it's
because
not going to be today. I
oh,
mean,
is it? Okay.
yeah, it's not going to be today. So no, I'm not saying don't go forward with whatever you guys are going forward. That's not what I'm implying at all.
Okay,
I
okay.
was just trying to understand the concern,
Mhm.
and then go back and look at how, they're dealing with that, or if even that's in the path of what we are trying to deal with right now.
Okay,
Because we're just doing the POC for the conference first.
okay.
Uh,
Oh, that's right.
and maybe in a couple weeks when they have a little bit more progress, I'll demo it for you guys.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And is GitHub slow for anyone else? Like, this takes forever to load this.
Um,
Oh, there.
in this peer, take care especially on the change I made on the specification, the Markdown files, because
Mhm.
I modify the type of ID, I provide some examples, I'm not sure, and probably I will have to update the ID of some conformance test also. Some conformance file, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay. So yeah, I'll take a look, but for me, this wasn't the only thing was understanding like what you were trying to reconcile. And after looking at it, it didn't really make sense to have it be a standalone thing when ID could describe it, describe the uniqueness. Because the big thing here to DC is that in the CD events primer and schema docs, it specifically says that the uniqueness must be guaranteed by source plus ID. So rather than having it be two fields, just saying that uniqueness is now just bound to ID makes it much, rather than doing that concatenation for that guarantee, because ID otherwise could be not, or not distinct, nor could source, right? But them in conjunction are. So rather than having it rely on one another, just having that distinction just on ID itself and just having them merged works reads easier and is easier to vet, right? So that's kind of uh the the main goal of it. Does it hopefully that helps.
You know what? I was muted. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's fine. Like I said, it was just a curiosity because I really, in my mind, I guess I didn't look closely at what actually was required.
Gotcha,
And I
gotcha.
think part of the reason why I went down this path to begin with was because there wasn't enough strict fields, right? And
Okay.
that's how this all came about. And so they are literally working on like the the workflow segment YAMLs today.
Okay.
And so last one I'm saying, like we probably won't hit this until sometime in the next sprint, maybe,
Okay.
if we run into that issue. But of course, everything we'll bring here, and like I said, when we get a little bit further along, I'll come and demo what we're doing, and let you guys see the little what is basically what we're calling junction box,
Hmm.
which is, I'm still infected with all of the code names, I guess.
Hmm.
I can't got rid of that crap yet. But yeah, so our setup that we're going to demo is a very, very light instance of what the system can do. And we need it for, of course, the conferences and for the investors to show the AI impact. So,
All right. All right. Yeah, it works for me.
all right.
Um, okay, cool. So let's so like I said, I'm gonna review this, David. I'll review this and then we'll put this up for vote for next week. Does that work? Is that enough
Yeah,
time
that's
for you,
fine. That's
Disease?
fine. We'll figure it out.
Okay,
All right.
perfect, perfect. All right, so I'll take a look at that this PR today. And we'll put it up for vote to merge next week. So this PR, source context ID merge to vote next week.
Yeah. And just for clarity too, I've always thought about the interoperability needing to be a different spec. You know,
Mhm.
like it might not perfectly align with where everyone wants CD events to go in general.
Mhm.
So it's not really going to preclude us for anything because worst case scenario, we'll just fork at a spot and keep going to get it to work.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. That also works. Okay, cool. So yeah, this yeah, like I said, I'll take a look at this later today and we'll vote next week on it. Um I mentioned approval events were already approved by David, just waiting for another approval from Andrea because he's the only blocker here. And then
You
yeah,
also mentioned that you maybe forgot to sign, yes, to add the sign off in the commit.
no, I think they are signed off actually. Like they're all verified, right?
No, it's
Oh,
two
this one.
mechanisms. Verify is with your key, but you have the DCO. It's to add a comment into your commit. Is sign off and your image. So you can use the line git push force, git rebase add dash dash sign off.
Ah,
There are
okay.
two mechanisms for Git. With the
Yeah,
DCO, you have to
I
use.
thought the GPG would include this, but it looks like it isn't. That's really odd. Interesting. Okay. I will go back and fix those commits. But yeah, I should be able to once Andre gets a good look at it, we should be able to merge it though. And I also wanted to talk about this one because the reason why, okay, so a little bit of context here. So I expanded the scope of this a little bit to satisfy some of David's needs. So right now, when having a target field, which is whatever it's or the is the end thing that you're connecting to, we have this domain ID or context ID, but David was needing a subject, which is the subject type and ID. But the problem with subject type, it requires parsing of the schema, right? Which all SDKs or we can't guarantee all SDKs do that today, right? So that's why I'm a little bit more hesitant to have subject type on there because this is not a field today. So that's why I made it context type instead. But if we can enforce it long term, we can maybe have subject type. But right now, I don't think we can include just subject type because it isn't a first class citizen in the schema today. Does that make sense, David?
No, because I need the type to. Why I need the type is to be able to use the ID. The ID alone doesn't provide enough information.
That's why I said there's context type, right? So there's two. There's now
Con-
context type.
context. It's doesn't. Don't tell me if the
Do just out of curiosity, when we talk about, and I know, I think what part of the challenge is too is that um, we need to be super clear about what the difference of context and subject from an operational perspective is, like what they're supposed to accomplish, and then that would kind of help us solidify like what should go in there. Um,
Yeah, I think so subject type is actually derived from context type. So if we go back to the schema,
yes, yes. We have an issue with case, but why it's not context type? It's because with context type is related to an event, so it means you report an incident. But for
mhm.
the relation, I don't care if it's to the event, if it's a report, if it's a close, if it's the relation is um, the event is related for a test is to say this test is related to this artifact, not related to the artifact is published, packaged, or signed. So it's why I use the type itself. I use subject type and not context type.
Yeah, but you said the fragment from, so like I said, that's not a
Yes,
first
but
class.
we have more information with the context type. But in this case, we will have the question. We will have the question for context type. We have the subject type. We have the predicate, and we have a version number. But when I create the relation, what should I put for predicate and version number? Whereas the only information I have is the ID and the type itself.
Yeah, well, what I'm getting at is, I understand your SDK, but we can't let SDK implementation details leak into the schemas.
Right.
That is a very that's not a, we got to go the other way, right? We don't.
Right.
No,
So
I don't talk about SDK. I talk about meaning of the link. The purpose of the link is to create a. It's why I
Is
ask
this the
if it's a
link
good place.
proposal that we're talking about now, or?
yeah, this is, well, it's part of the link is to relax Target. Like right now, Target is based on context ID, and the whole purpose of this was to allow for a more relaxed version. Is to introduce domain ID, which allows you to if you don't have like an event basically to say this is a domain that it comes from. But
Why would you
David,
know what domain it was coming from?
oh, domain. So it's domain is a very specific uh example here. It's like a Jira ticket. Like domain would be like Jira, for example, project. So it's just like it's a very specific earn if format.
Okay. I yeah, well, I mean, do we want to burn up a whole this meeting in this particular discussion? Because it sounds like, this was, well, originally CD events was a very flat and open kind of schema
Mhm.
process, which is why I was saying like, hey, I should separate out the interoperability bit, and just, have that be a separate schema and do that, separately so that this stays as open as people need it to be.
Mhm.
But I also, it's like, it sounds like we're introducing concepts to solve specific problems, that some of those problems that we're trying to solve, it might be like the group that wants to solve that problem should flush it all the way out and then bring the whole thing completed, like operationally completed. And say, hey, this is how we see this system working. And because if you're just kind of slotting things in to solve problems as you run into them without the core concept, you're going to keep flipping things over when you find new things. And we won't have enough of a base for people to build off of because we're all going to keep shifting like little details. So like really good clarity of like, context is this, subjects is this, and this is the purpose of this portion of the system, and this is what the intended usage and problems that it solves helps line that up for people to consume it in the way that we're intending if we're getting more specific in
Yeah.
how we expect it to be used. And so that's what I'm saying. We need to communicate and figure that portion out really, really clearly to make clear statements about it so that when we're trying to figure out how to solve some of these problems, it's clear what the purpose of those sections are or how it's intended to be used so that everybody's doing that the same way. Is that?
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I stayed away from like using context and subject and invent
Mm-hmm.
or like and created domain ID just to be because it's very specific to like domain because it's solving a very specific problem. But I tried to squeeze in a need that David had, but we're disagreeing on just this type here. Um, so maybe I lessen the scope again and we reintroduce this portion once we have those questions that are answered. Like what context, like the purpose of context and subject, for example. Would that work? Because like I said, like I have a feeling, David, we're not going to agree on this because I don't think subject type is the right fit here because it's not a first class citizen in the schema itself. And rather than trying to iron that out, I'd rather just lessen the scope then.
Everything is based on one question I asked above. It's how I create relation between two subjects, a test and an artifact. Today, for a test and an artifact is defined as part of the content of the test. But I want to add more information, maybe the repository where the test was run, maybe the pipeline that triggers the test, or where the pipeline is, the test is executed. It's why I ask, should I use link or should I use custom data to hold?
That sounds like it should be in custom data, not in link. I mean, well, if it's the same link that I had the link proposal created for, it serves a very, very specific function for lifting things together in an internal, in an enclosed system. And this is an enclosed, I mean, that was the whole point of the design. It was for an enclosed system. It was always for, solving the interoperability problem, which is 100% enclosed. And so if you're trying to use it in a distributed fashion, then that's counter to where, the whole thing was going originally. So that's a part of that question, if that's the link service that we're talking about.
No.
Okay.
This is a very specific link type. So
Okay.
there is a link type called link relation,
Uh-huh.
which allows you to add any sort of like relational connection to it. So it doesn't need to be like a path, like a
Mhm.
graph path, but it could be like, hey, this is just an artifact link, right? So it's a little bit more flexible. And that's why we're trying to relax this one a little bit to allow it to make the connections to things that are outside of CDEvents, like for
Okay.
instance, yeah, like domain or and then just but you're right though, like where's the boundary is a perfectly acceptable question that we need to answer because we don't want to make link relation too crazy, right? But we definitely need to figure out where that line is, and right now it is to answer some of these external things, like how do we go about linking these external nodes or resources to a CD event. And that was the whole purpose for a link relation, was to do that, was to satisfy that. So to answer your question though, David, is yes, that is a problem. But I think if we try to answer it in this initial PR, it's going to require a lot more depth. And I think shrinking the scope and having another PR that addresses that question specifically about how you link about subject type and
Yes, it's because you say you use it. It's when we discussed 2 weeks ago. You say,
yes.
but we can go back to the first proposal.
Yeah, I think that works a lot. I think lessening a scope and then tackling that one specifically, I think makes a lot more sense. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do that, lessen the scope, and then we will talk next week specifically on
We also go to this path during previous discussion because I say the URN that you mentioned are in every case URN to a subject existing, a ticket.
yeah.
So we should have a way to say if in the future this system is connected, we should have the same way to identify
The
the
connections, yeah.
subject.
Yeah, I agree. That is definitely something that we should solve for the relational link. But yeah, it's a little out of scope for this PR. And then introduce another proposal / PR that addresses subject to subject linking. Right? That's what you're ultimately asking for, right, David?
Yes.
Yeah.
I link in the chat how, based on our conversation this last week, I implement using custom data this subject to subject to start working on it for my purpose, for my use.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So, like I said, the only issue that I have with it is just that type is an extraction of 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 that. Well, it's not a first class citizen. So that's kind of issue number one, is that this would need to then, if someone wanted to send a link where the SDK did not provide a subject type, they would need to manually parse that, right? And my concern is once we start having users manually parse something, that that's a recipe for a disaster. However, if we were to say that SDKs are expected to have this as a first class citizen, then I'm more okay with that. Or if we want to model it inside of the schema, I'd be happy with that as well. So, but yeah, ultimately that's the contention that I have right now with this type. But yeah, we can definitely revisit. Um, oh wait, I wasn't sharing my screen or sharing the window that it opened it up in another window. But yeah, I was talking about this specifically. But yeah, we'll figure it out though. But I'll work with you specifically, David, to iron out what that should look like. So maybe we can have like a side meeting where we kind of like figure out what that should look like. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, that works for me. And then do we have any other PRs? Oh, this was Henry's, right? You said you were gonna look at this, David, and then potentially close it.
No,
Oh, I
as I
see.
mentioned, I keep it open until I work on it. I will work on it
All right, that
as a
works for me.
reminder.
All right. Yep, yep, yep. Explanation of Python, rewrite in JS, David, and then still pending. Okay. All right. So that was all that was open in the PRs section. And then Matt did open up this feature flag one, and we did have a meeting with him about it. And he said he was going to work on a proposal. So I don't know if we mentioned that in the last SIG, but that is something that Matt is going to openly work on, is this feature flag proposal, and we should hopefully see that soon. So I'll actually ping him because I haven't heard from him. Have you heard from him, did he see at all about the status of that?
I have not heard from him about the status of that. I've only talked to him about Spinnaker things.
Okay, okay. I'll go ahead and ping him on this. Feature flag, ping Matt on this. Uh, all right, we'll go ahead and ping him on that and see where we are with that. I did know that he said that it was gonna be a little bit, so I don't, maybe I'll ping him next week,
Yeah.
just so we give him enough time. Because I know it's been a month. I know he said that it'll probably be a couple months, so maybe I'll give him a little bit more time on that. But okay, cool. Was there anything else that people wanted to bring up? Victor?
Something. Yep. I was gonna
Yep,
say.
yep, yep.
Yeah, I come here again to had interesting discussion with DDC. Yeah, love to understand the. I shared this thing with DDC. The second one. This is from a data perspective. How people share data. The second link. Then I come to think because I look at the CD event also have the concept of context. I think that the definition is a little different from a context in the world I'm in. So that's why I bring the first link, which is the so-called basic formal ontology, because there every domain have their own terminology, so it's quite different. But the basic formal ontology is kind of the most basic logistical ontology. So when people use the terminology in that, you can actually understand each other much better and actually do reasoning easier. Um, so, um,
Yes, but what ontology though? Like there isn't one universal ontology, right? So
yeah,
which
it's called basic formal ontology. By the way, this is I use ChatGPT, so it looks like ChatGPT understand basic formal ontology very well already.
okay.
So if you say, yeah, please explain to me in a term of basic formal ontology, how do I classify what I have here, the terms, the subjects,
Mhm.
artifacts, I understand how to do that. So this is a possibility. I'm not proposing to do it, but I think it will help is when we extending CDEvents to data to use basic formal ontology to, if there's anything that's not clear, to understand each other.
Gotcha.
So one of the things I'd like to add to this, though, is that in my discussion with Victor, one of the things that I realized is that there is a blending of like what of semantic interoperability, where basically you're matching your data structures in the sense that you want to store data somewhere like in a database that says, hey, this is the thing, where what we're trying to do is a semantic ontology for the movement of data through a system. And I think there's a slight disconnect in that, and that's one of the things that I was, actually from that conversation with David I mean with Victor was alluding to is like, hey, we should talk about that end goal to figure out where, you want to get with the thing that you're doing so that we can line that up right. Now, on the subject of the ontology of, how we're moving this data through, I do think that's a good idea to like go back and just make sure that we formalize that portion of it, because that solves that question that I was asking later about, okay, what does each section, what's the purpose of it? What's it supposed to drive through? So that it's clear, like, oh, this is the routing area and this is the blah, blah, blah area. Like that kind of piece would make a lot of sense to be, and get that in our own documentation that makes that super clear, like this section is intended to that. And I thought we had kind of done that with the concepts of subject and predicate. Um, but I also realized that we don't call anything predicate in the event itself. We use the word context. And so is it like, you know what I mean? Like we talk about it one way over here and with one ontology, then we come over and actually implement it with another. And so like getting consistent in that would really help.
Yeah, well, context holds a lot more than just the predicate. Um,
Yeah.
but I do see what you're saying though, is that if we introduce concepts like predicate, we should be clear on what that is in the schema, which we don't do. That's actually a really good call out.
Yeah, that's the point. It's not that
Yeah,
we can't have, the context can't represent more than just the predicate. It's like that ontology, the linkage, and what each area is supposed to actually do. That's what we need to get super clear about.
yeah.
And then that should help, David's problem and come to Victor's point of like, here's a way to get these things, addressed because there's systems to do that.
Actually, that's actually a really good point. If we go
Victor's
back,
good. Victor's really good. I
yeah,
like
so
him.
if we look at the schemas today, to kind of so the predicate, right, is this, right? But when we talk, so it's subject, which is this, and this is the predicate, but like you would have to know that that's what the how this is how
Exactly.
this yeah, you would have to know how the tokens in the in this to really understand what those concepts are. And yeah, I think instead if we model this, so I'm going to take this real quick, I'm going to copy and paste this and move it over into our little document here. Let's see, does that work? No, it doesn't. Okay, so I'm just going to paste this in here, right? So it seems like what we need is a predicate like as a field, and that would be deleted, right? And then subject would be um uh artifact in this case, right? And this would live all inside of the context, right? So we also already have a subject, at a top level, but so I feel like this would overload that a little bit. Okay. So, but yeah, I agree. We need to figure that out because it's not really when you go from the white paper to this, it's not really clear on how those concepts map into our schema, which is a really big issue.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and so I was gonna solidify that for like operationally what we were doing. And again, it's more like, okay, do we leave this thing free and open like it is so people can interpret it, or are we really trying to lend structure to say, okay, this is how it should be used, which was always the context of, driving towards an interoperability system is like events must be used this way, where, if people want to be able to freely build tools and ideas around it, that might not work with the interoperability system. You still should be able to use CD events to do a thing and to come up
right,
with your ideas and create, which is why I was always about separating them. And then drawing from that schema set and saying, hey, we inherit from that schema set to accomplish this task. But then being super clear about things like what goes in the subject and what goes in the context, and making sure, and actually what the base event was. That's what the base event concept was all about too,
right.
saying that we needed to have these fields to accomplish this other task that we want to do, and then inherit from there because our system, has this huge inheritance model. And the more that we look at it, the less reason we actually find to actually keep custom data. Custom
Hmm.
data is like almost serving zero purpose,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
because with the single inheritance model that we're describing, and I think it's 253, um, you could put the data anywhere. It's just that as each time you introduce a new schema, it can introduce new keys, but it just can't override any of the existing keys. And that's the only time you need namespacing is when you want to override existing keys. But that we
right.
can force based on the schema, that it was introduced at that point and namespace it automatically for you.
Okay. Yeah, I think this needs a little bit of a proposal
Yep.
um on how we solidify the concepts that are in the primer to the schema. Is that something that you are already working on, DC, or
No, no. Well,
Victor?
we're working on it in terms of the stuff that we're doing, but
Right.
not in the like trying to solve this
CD
greater
events,
problem over
gotcha.
here. I mean, it's more of a headcount issue. Like if I had a couple more guys, when I get a couple more guys, I might be able to address that, but that won't be until the summer until I do the next round of hiring.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it should be after the UN event.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. Is there something that you'd be willing to take a stab at, Victor?
I can assist simply
Okay.
because I'm a journalist. I have so many different things, not
Yeah,
specialized in
that's
this
fair. That's
particular
fair.
area. I do added two more linked. One is to the actual BFO GitHub. The other one is to a concept called a semantic gap. So by the way, I tried many time already using ChatGPT. It does understand BFO very well, so it's almost guaranteed that if you ask ChatGPT to review the current CD event definition. So that's the ontology. Everybody have their own ontology almost. So having everybody agree on the same thing is almost impossible. But to be able
Yes.
to reason using BFO to say, okay, in the context, in the CD event, we have this context. What do you think if you scan through the CD event repository definition? What do you think is context in this BFO ontology? That he can tell you, okay, according to me, this is what it is. This is what is context in CD events context. So,
Uh,
so
I will add 3 points. For me, it's not context in general purpose. Every time for the first level, you should see event, context, event, subject. That subject of the event, context of the event. The first part of the context is what is the context of this event. the relation with other, what trigger it, what is the type of this, and the context part was defined based on cloud event historically. It's also why you have type with all this chain and not subject, because subject exists in cloud event, and inside the subject you put the ID. But as in the past, the ID was moved directly as a children of the subject field. Sorry, it's why there is no subject under the context. There is an evolution. I was not here, but I guess there is an evolution from the flat cloud event format to this structure, and it's also why we have this naming on some points of subject, type, and context.
So this is actually
event context.
Understand. So this is not about actual how CDEvent do things. This is more about somebody who have never seen it before, how to understand it very quickly.
Yeah. And to be clear, David, so what this is trying to do is make it very clear when we have these concepts like subject and predicate, how quickly or how can you map that easily to the schema? Or not even that. Actually, sorry, I take that back. When we're talking about concepts, how can we do it in such a way that is consistent and clear? That's the point of the ontology. That's the point of the BFO, essentially, is to introduce that consistency for semantics.
Yeah.
So I am okay with introducing BFO, but my worry. So here's my worry about that, though, is that we start getting into a space that I'm not saying that it's not needed. It might look too academic, is my concern. And okay.
I'm actually not suggesting CDEvents to adopt BFO in
Oh,
any
gotcha.
form.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood. Okay,
I'm saying in order for anyone who talked to you, to Daisy, to David about CDEvents, if both sides agree on the kind of the same ground truth, it will be immediately much easier to understand, reason, etc. You don't have to adopt BFO at all in your taxonomy.
Right. So, okay, so I guess my question then is, what is the next steps then? Is it to understand the
So you are expert in the CI/CD pipeline, right, domain, right? So I suggested for the DC, once he has his initial product, I can take that and talk to the data folks, whoever that means, right? Because so many, the open source guys, the product guys. I say, this is the CD event data plane, right? How can we work together to make sure that the data pipeline and CI/CD pipeline understand each other and talk in the same terminology? Not necessarily exactly the same, but at least understand each other, right?
Right, but
So,
and that's the point I was making too, is like they don't need to understand each other. That's not how the system actually works.
well, to me, that's still needed. The reason is
I know. That's
last,
what I was gonna. That's but why when
uh,
you and I were talking about it, I was
yeah,
like, hey, you should like wait and see what I'm doing, and then you'll
yeah,
understand what I mean. Yeah.
yeah. So that's why there's a thing called semantic gap. Um, just to give you an example, um, in the operating system, everything is about like blocks, I/O, etc., right? If I run an application, a database application on it, the database saying, I want to do an index scan, I want to do this and that, like full table scan. To the operating system, it does not understand that primitive. That's what we call semantic gap. And that's a problem. So that's why people are bypassing operating system to create like a database application without operating system. So that's why semantic gap is bad, and it causes interoperability problems as well as semantic, just all kinds of problems because of that. So by understanding, even if it's using different terminology, but understanding universally what it means on a higher level of ontology, it is possible to understand each other and provide the right requirements and right primitives to be interoperable more optimally.
Yeah, so I think so I understand what you're saying, Victor, the I'm just curious on how we get there, though, is still my question. Because this is very theoretical.
Let
And my concern is by introducing these concepts is how do we make it practical, right? Because okay, so what I will do is
I did run it against that's interesting. I did what he just suggested and I just ran it just to see what they what the what the AI would do.
Mhm.
And I will review its output before I, of course, share this with you guys, and we can get a, extend that conversation after that from that point. But it is more of what I was talking about in, I don't know how structurally useful this will be in terms of what we're trying to do with CD events, at least for the folks that I know that are building applications where there is the data awareness that we are communicating data semantically. That's one issue. But there's also that what we are doing is we're working with orchestration tools. And the thing that I noticed about the orchestration systems is that their work types are really, really specific. And it is that specificity that I'm building around. So I, again, like you're saying, I don't know if this is going to line up perfectly, but at least we can have a discussion point and take a look once that part's done, if that's okay. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but
yeah, I think so. I'm still worried though. Okay, let's so I guess my first question is what is the problem that you're trying to solve,
yep.
Victor, with both the ontology as well as the semantic gap that you outlined? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Is it to be more consistent?
maybe I'll put it in a reverse question. If you talk to an agentic AI application designer, what's the value of CD events to agentic AI designer?
Okay. So what is the benefit? Um, so I can't really speak on that.
Yeah.
Now,
So
I can
that's
I can I can give maybe an answer. Today, my Claude agent, to name it, uh, is is pretty aware of CDEvent structure, etc. As I work a lot around it, and it's easy. I have to review it, but he can quickly draft request on my database where I store all CD events to create some kind of lineage if I use a data ops term. So I have today, and it's one of my purposes, to have lineage of artifacts. So he was able to create some graph, to create some dashboard, etc. And I hope and I guess I will be able to use it to create with more information, like the links I discussed above, to be able to create more information and to use this information maybe to provide this information for Conduit or another orchestrator. or another dashboard. I'm not
Shared,
sure it's answer your question, but yes.
I should just shared one of a new concept called harness engineering, which basically is saying AI do all the coding. Human will be the person doing the monitoring and kind of, I guess, orchestrating the process. So what does CDEvent do for that harness engineering process?
It provide a standard language, an API at some point, at least to read the output of different system. Today, I have when I have to deal with GitHub, GitLab, output events, it takes time for the agent and consume a lot of token to know what is the schema, how I have to read it, to manage the output of all those systems.
The whole process, there's no human interaction, at least for the one iteration, is all AI. Why CDEvents?
Yeah, but that's where AI is going, not where AI is now. So all right, well,
if you have standardization, it's easier for AI. It will use less resources and it will also generate less
of course,
error
yeah,
and
of course.
misinterpretation.
But that's what all of the extra information is about, right? Giving it that context. Because I think one of the problems that we're noticing in practice is that the AI seem to have, be working towards infinite knowledge, but still have no experience. And it's that lack of experience that's really creating the problem. So it's more like, how do you give it sufficient experience to understand what it's doing, or to be able to make judgment calls while something is actually happening. It's more than just linking data. It's understanding the system complexity and the impacts of the things that happen in it. And one of the things that CDEvents does do is it tracks what actually happens. So in that context, done properly, yeah, you could give that to AI and improve its performance. Does that help, Victor?
Exactly. That's why there's so many new things that's coming. BFO, but the ontology basically help each other understand from fundamental level what is talking to what is happening on the other side of the wall, basically.
Well, yes. And again, what my point has been the whole time is like that's a human thing. We need to do that in a way that the machines understand it. And I think that the semantic capabilities of the human mind and the way that we're building AI and how it actually works, that doesn't quite align the same way, because of some of the techniques of speaking, of communicating ideas back and forth that makes that challenging for the machines, is why no one's been able to overcome that. They get closer and closer by getting better and better to predict, but you've got to get beyond that prediction point.
Yeah. So I think in the short term, there's nothing you need to do. Just whenever you have spare time on the weekend, having fun, just read about JPA for a little bit, just get test it out on a little bit. And then when the Daisy has his initial product, that's when it will be useful to take it to some people who are doing data and say, tell me why we're using CDEvents. Then we'll just say, okay, ChatGPT says this is how we understand it on the what is being provided from the CDN side, the data plane versus what's happening on the other side, the data products. Where are the how to say so-called how to say that so I cannot think of a good example right now, but that's one BFO will allow different domain experts to understand each other much better. Easier. I try that. It literally is so much easier.
Okay. 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 I mean, I've ran it and I'm looking at what it put out as the BFO for the schema. If anybody wants it, I mean, you guys can run it yourself. It only took like a few minutes to figure it out. Um, it it's interesting if you like that kind of thing. I don't know how useful it would be, but it is interesting.
Yeah, I'll like
I can share
maybe.
my look. I'll share it with you with the one that I did if you want. But I'll put it in the CD events chat if you guys want me to.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that'll be really helpful. Just like putting that
Okay.
in the CD events chat, to kind of help. Um,
Okay. It makes a TTL file, but you can open it with a regular like BB edit or something like that. Okay.
okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. We only have a few minutes as well. Was there anything else that anyone had that wanted that wanted to discuss before we close? No? Okay. With that said, thank you everyone for joining. Uh, I did get approval from Andrea for the event, the approval event as well. So
All
I
right.
will go ahead and fix the DCO errors, and then we should be able to merge that today as well. So thank you everyone for attending, and we will see each other, or I'll be present next week as well. So if you have any questions, etc., please ask them in the Slack channel, and we will go ahead and do our best to answer them. So thank you again for
Okay.
everyone.
And I'll download it as a PDF. One last, just to throw that in there. Okay.
Okay, yeah,
All
that works. Awesome. So yeah, thanks everyone. I'll see you again next week. If you have any questions, please let us know.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.